Didn't she want to do something to avenge Brig's death, her own father's death? But thoughts of Marin disappeared as she saw her parents' new home. When she left, they had only built the wooden frame. Now there was a small, neat cottage set among a cluster of other similar houses. As Talon neared the door, she paused. She missed them. What would seeing them do to her? A cluster of oak leaves was pinned to the door. Oaks had been Brig's favorite tree. Talon raised one hand, then hesitated, then knocked just beneath the oak leaves. The door opened, and a woman with dark hair and violet eyes the same shade as Talon's stepped out. The violet eyes widened, then crinkled with the rest of the woman's face into a smile. "Talon!" she exclaimed. Talon pushed aside the memories of Brig, only for a moment, and stepped into her mother's arms as though she were a young child once more. Talon's father, having received the news that a strange girl cloaked in blue had entered his house, had dropped his fan mid-stroke and run all the way from the new market area straight into Talon's arms. Talon returned his embrace, but the sight of her father shocked her. He had simultaneously aged and grown to resemble Brig. Not Brig as he lived, though, but the sight of Brig as he lay upon the ground dead, the sight that still haunted Talon's dreams. Her father looked like Brig had, at that moment, the life snapped out of him. The change made it difficult for Talon to meet his eyes, however bad she felt about not returning his gaze. "Received your letter about the Arizona. Tell us more." Her mother spooned more venison and potatoes onto Talon's wooden plate, a mid-afternoon meal that her mother had whipped up when she heard how long it had been since Talon had eaten a home-cooked meal. Talon chewed slowly before responding. "We have about 50 people in various towns and villages across the Lamnia. We organize groups of 5 or 7 in each settlement, then move on to the next. It allows the movement to keep growing. You'll find many more here in Forest Edge." Talon's father drained his mug of ale. "No one has forgotten what that copper dragon did to us. We're still rebuilding." Talon's mother nodded. "If you like, we could have a town meeting arranged by nightfall. We told them what you're doing. Everyone's glad that someone is finally addressing what a menace the metallic dragons are." "Not everyone," Talon's father cautioned, "but most. Your mother and I especially. I worried when you decided to join the clerics of these new gods, but it appears that the path you chose is a good one." Talon's heart warmed to hear her parents say this, although they had not tried to stop her from seeking out the clerics of Mishkael. They had been suspicious of the new gods and their followers, as had many people. When the gods returned to the world after so many centuries gone, people couldn't help but wonder what it meant, for good or ill. That her parents trusted her and would help her made Talon's confidence grow. "That's a wonderful idea," Talon said. "My friends and I had hoped to talk with people individually, but a town meeting would be a perfect forum." Talon's father stood up from the table. "I'll spread the word. Come to the market at moonrise with your friends." "Thank you so much, father." Talon rose as well. "I hate to leave now, mother, but—" Talon's mother made a flapping motion with her hands. "Go on, girl. This is more important. If what you do prevents even more person from death in the claws of those vicious beasts, go forth and do what you must." Talon hugged both her parents, then ran back to where the others set up camp. She began shouting before she could smell the fire Rama had built. "They're holding a town meeting for us," she said as she skidded to a halt before running into Elrit. "We might be able to do all our work in one night." Rama looked up from mending a tear in an ivory robe. "We'd best prepare then," she said. "This could be our most important meeting ever." "More important than Palanthus?" Rogan asked, sounding a bit perturbed. "Rama and I recruited knights and important families there." "We have money from the families of Palanthus and force from the knights," Talon agreed. "But look at this town." She waved in the direction of the newly built structures and freshly plowed fields, between which could still be seen numerous areas of scorched earth. "There's not a family in this town who didn't lose a loved one in Osarvia's attack. This is where we find passion," Talon said. As the moon rose high in the dark sky above the forested Vingard Mountains, the 4 companions walked into town. Talon wondered what they thought of her home village. It probably looked crude and poor to Robin and Rogan. One never knew what Elred thought about such things. "Oh my!" Rama said, slowing. For a moment, Talon thought the wizard was going to make a comment about the condition of the town. Then she saw what Rama was looking at. In the center of town was a glowing circle of lanterns. As more people approached, the lanterns multiplied and moved toward the center of the circle. "Are they all here for us?" Rama whispered. "I had no idea there were so many people in the forest edge." "There aren't," Talon said, puzzled. "Not even before the attack. Talon recognized only about 1 in every 3 people. Where did they come from?" "From other villages that fell prey to us after she possessed the copper dragon." Talon turned to see her father, who was beaming almost as brightly as the light that shone from his lantern. "When I told the workers at the market, a few of the younger men found the fastest horses in town and rode to spread the word." "This is far more than I ever dreamed," Talon said. "Thank you." "No, our thanks to you, Talon," a voice behind her said. Talon recognized Haro, Marin's uncle. "You started something that could change the fate of Corinne forever." Talon could not respond and did not have time to, even if she could speak. Talon's mother and father pushed her toward the podium at the center of the market square. She looked to Rama. "Should we all speak?" Talon asked. Whenever they spoke to a group, they all took turns, telling their personal stories. Palanthus was the first place they'd been unable to do so, but that was hardly their fault. Rama shook her head. "Not tonight. These people don't want to hear our stories. They want to hear someone who knows how they suffered." Talon nodded and walked up the wooden steps to the podium. She looked up at the figure-8 constellation of Mishkael. Whispering a prayer for strength, she turned to face the crowd. Talon had spoken of Brick's death many times in front of many people. Never before, however, had she spoken to people who knew him, who had lost so many of their own family and friends in the same manner. Tears filled her eyes and her throat closed. The only thing that kept her talking was the sight of her parents in the first road. "When I first saw the copper dragon, I felt only awe. It was all so beautiful. I had always heard that the metallic dragons meant us no harm, so I stood and looked at it. I called Brig to ask if he could see it. While we were distracted by it, the zombie worm rose from the ground, and Brig..." She could not tell of Brig's death, but for once she didn't have to. She heard faint sobs from the crowd. Talon gulped and said, "We know now that dragon was possessed by an evil sorceress. It was once good, but it was still dangerous. If the dragons are banished from Corinne, as they were before, we can remove that danger. We exist only at the whim of these creatures. The good dragons could turn on us at any moment, by magic, by coercion, or by their own choice. And what of draconians? They come from the eggs of good dragons. If those eggs were no longer around, no more draconians could be created." Talon expected the scoffs to begin now, as they did at so many places. But here people nodded and murmured sounds of agreement. "I propose that at the next Whitestone Council we approach them and speak our piece about the so-called good dragons. We persuade those in power to convince the dragons to leave Salamia." Now crickets were the only sound Talon heard. "They don't want to hear me," Talon thought with sudden certainty. "They wish I had never come back to dredge up their memories." Then one lone person began clapping. The clapping grew louder and less scattered until it sounded like a heartbeat pounding from the earth itself. Talon's parents smiled at her, their own hands coming together with the rest of the villagers. "Stop!" a voice shrieked. The thundering applause stopped immediately, and everyone turned back, where Marin stood on a bench and addressed the crowd. "We all suffered at the hands of Asfaria. She destroyed so much of what we hold dear here. But the copper dragon was possessed," she yelled, her face paled. "It never would have attacked us otherwise. The good dragons returned to save us, and they did. And this is how we repay them? If the copper dragon wasn't around to possess, how far would that sorceress have gotten?" Talon's mother shouted back at Marin. The audience rippled with agreement. "If the dragons leave, they can't be used for evil purposes." The crowd grew so loud that Marin stepped off the bench. She looked at Talon once, and the sorrow in her eyes was so great that Talon couldn't hold her gaze. Marin slipped out of the crowd among hisses as folks crowded the podium seeking to join the heirs of Huma. And that'd be the end of chapter 3. Hope you enjoyed.